When you think of Tommy Lee Jones, what comes to mind? A face that looks like it was carved from granite? That no-nonsense, gravelly voice? On screen, he's the ultimate authority figure, the tough-as-nails lawman, the gruff but wise mentor. He's a guy who takes the craft of acting as seriously as a surgeon takes their work. But what happens when that on-screen intensity bleeds into real life? What happens when the man who built a career on being serious is forced to share the screen with people he finds, well, anything but? For some of Hollywood's biggest names, working with Tommy Lee Jones wasn't just a job, it was an exercise in survival. His old-school dedication to the script and the process sometimes clashed dramatically with co-stars he felt were unprofessional, undisciplined, or just plain goofy. These weren't just quiet disagreements. Some of these on-set conflicts have become legendary. Today we're counting down the top 6 Hollywood figures who reportedly couldn't stand working with Tommy Lee Jones, and vice versa. We'll get into the on-set tensions, the icy exchanges, and the behind-the-scenes drama. And you will not believe the story behind his explosive public clash with one of the most famous comedians of all time, which ended with a phrase so cold it has echoed through Hollywood for decades. "I cannot sanction your buffoonery." Coming day. In at number 6 is a conflict that wasn't about shouting matches or public drama, but about a fundamental difference in acting styles. This was a quiet, chilly clash of methods between two Oscar-winning legends, Tommy Lee Jones and Sally Field. They worked together on Steven Spielberg's 2012 epic, Lincoln, and both earned Academy Award nominations for their roles. Jones played the fiery abolitionist Thaddeus Stevens, while Field portrayed the emotionally volatile Mary Todd Lincoln. Their performances were incredible, but behind the scenes, their approaches to acting were like oil and water. Sally Field is known for her immersive, emotionally driven method. She lives inside her character's turmoil, carrying their emotional weight with her, even when the cameras stop rolling. This is how she delivers those incredibly raw and vulnerable performances. Tommy Lee Jones, on the other hand, comes from a different school of thought. He's a Harvard-educated intellectual who sees acting as a technical craft. For him, the work is about hitting your marks, delivering your lines with precision, and saving the energy for when the camera is actually on. He views off-camera emotional exploration as indulgent and unnecessary. This difference reportedly created some friction during the intense production of Lincoln. The set was a space of deep reverence, with many actors staying in character. Sally Field was one of them, embodying the nervous, high-strung energy of Mary Todd Lincoln around the clock. According to some on-set accounts, after one particularly draining scene, Field continued to engage with Jones as if they were still their characters. Jones, a man with zero patience for what he considers fluff, finally looked at her and bluntly said, "Sally, the camera's not rolling. You can stop now." It was a small moment, but it said everything. It wasn't about personal dislike, but a deep philosophical divide. In Jones's view, the job is paused when the director yells, "Cut." For Field, the character's emotional state can't be flipped on and off like a switch. Field herself later acknowledged their different styles, confirming the tension in a 2016 interview. She admitted, "Tommy isn't warm and fuzzy. Let's just say we had very different approaches." This wasn't even their first time clashing. Reports from the set of their 1981 film Back Roads also suggested their personalities didn't quite mesh. Despite the friction, or maybe because of it, their scenes in Lincoln are electric, proving that sometimes artistic tension can create pure movie magic. Our 5th spot takes us to the set of the 1998 action thriller, U.S. Marshals. This film should have been a victory lap for Tommy Lee Jones. He was reprising his role as U.S. Marshal Samuel Gerard, the very character that won him an Oscar for The Fugitive. He felt a deep sense of ownership over Gerard, and who could blame him? But this time, the fugitive he was hunting was played by Wesley Snipes, a massive action star with a powerful screen presence and his own strong ideas. From the start, reports from the set suggested a turf war was brewing between the two leads. Jones was fiercely protective of his Oscar-winning character and was reportedly annoyed when Snipes, a huge star in his own right, came in with suggestions to change dialogue and character motivations. In Jones's mind, he was the authority on Samuel Gerard, and he wasn't looking for a co-pilot. The tension reportedly grew during the film's many action sequences. Wesley Snipes, a talented martial artist, was famous for doing his own stunts and had strong opinions on how the fight scenes should be choreographed. Jones, however, was said to view this as showboating that detracted from the story. The director, Stuart Baird, diplomatically described the on-set dynamic, saying, "We had two very strong personalities who had very different approaches to their work. Oil and water sometimes." The atmosphere was so chilly that Jones and Snipes allegedly started communicating through the director and his assistants instead of speaking to each other directly between takes. While these reports of a Cold War are not as widely documented as some of his other feuds, it's a fascinating look at a professional power struggle. Jones felt his Oscar gave him the final say, while Snipes felt his action expertise gave him a right to shape the film's biggest moments. U.S. Marshals did okay at the box office, but it never captured the critical acclaim of The Fugitive. The on-screen chemistry between the hunter and the hunted felt disconnected, leading many to wonder if the off-screen chill seeped into the final film. At number 4 is a man who, while not an actor, was arguably the main source of Tommy Lee Jones's frustration on one of his most infamous projects. We're talking about director Joel Schumacher and the 1995 film Batman Forever. Jones's conflicts on this movie weren't just with his co-stars. His issue was with the very soul of the film itself, a clash of artistic visions that reportedly made the production a miserable experience for him. To get why, you need some context. Tommy Lee Jones had just won an Oscar for The Fugitive. He was at the top of his game, a respected dramatic actor. When he signed on to play Two-Face, the franchise was still defined by Tim Burton's dark, gothic tone. Jones likely expected to play a tragic, psychologically complex villain. What he got was Joel Schumacher's Gotham, a neon-drenched, over-the-top, campy circus. The studio wanted a more family-friendly, toy-friendly Batman, and Schumacher delivered a throwback to the 1960s Adam West TV show. For a serious actor like Jones, this was a bait and switch. Jones, the master of realism, was now being asked to perform in a world of garish colors and cartoonish sound effects. He reportedly felt Schumacher was turning Two-Face into a one-dimensional, cackling joke, wasting the character's potential for a truly dark and tragic performance. He was so displeased with the flamboyant direction that he had to be coaxed into filming certain scenes he felt were just too silly. Years later, Schumacher himself seemed to acknowledge their conflicting visions, stating, "Tommy is an extraordinary actor who takes his work very seriously. Perhaps a psychologically complex villain wasn't the right match for the tone we were trying to achieve." It was a polite Hollywood way of saying their partnership was a creative mismatch. Jones, for his part, has been notably quiet about Batman Forever in career retrospectives, a silence that speaks volumes. This conflict is key because it sets the stage for his other clashes on that set. He wasn't just a grumpy guy. He was a serious artist who felt he was trapped in a creative nightmare. Pretty wild, right? These stories really show how different personalities and acting styles can explode under the pressure of a Hollywood set. If you love getting the real story behind the Hollywood legends, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. You won't want to miss what we have coming up next. If Tommy Lee Jones's issue with Joel Schumacher was about the world of Batman Forever, his friction with the film's star, Val Kilmer, was about how an actor should behave in that world. While Jones couldn't stand Jim Carrey's comedy chaos, he reportedly found Val Kilmer's intense method acting just as irritating. It was a collision between two totally different acting philosophies, and the set of Batman Forever was ground zero. In 1995, Val Kilmer was famous for his brooding intensity and his dedication to method acting. He was known for fully inhabiting his characters, blurring the line between himself and the role. When he put on the Batman suit, he brought that same psychological deep dive to the character, wanting to explore the trauma and loneliness of Bruce Wayne. Tommy Lee Jones, as we know, had zero time for that. He saw acting as a job. Learn your lines, hit your marks, deliver, and go home. He reportedly viewed Kilmer's soul-searching process as pretentious, especially for what he already considered a silly superhero movie. According to crew members, the two stars barely spoke a word to each other off camera. One production assistant famously said it was like watching two gunfighters in different corners of the saloon. The tension boiled over during a confrontation scene between Batman and Two-Face. Kilmer wanted to do multiple takes to find the perfect emotional beat. For Jones, who came prepared to nail it and move on, this was unprofessional. He reportedly lost his patience and exclaimed, loud enough for the crew to hear, "I've made 7 films this year. I don't have time for this nonsense." But the most telling evidence might be what's not said. In his 2020 memoir, I'm Your Huckleberry, Val Kilmer writes about his career and his time as Batman, but Tommy Lee Jones's name is nowhere to be found. Some have interpreted this complete omission as a deliberate choice. When Jones was asked about working with Kilmer during the press tour, his response was pure ice. "I worked with Batman. I didn't work with Mr. Kilmer." It was a Cold War on a neon-lit set that has seemingly never thawed. At number 2, we have a feud that is pure, uncut 1990s action movie gold. This isn't some subtle disagreement over acting theory. This is a legendary clash of giant egos. The year was 1992. The film was the blockbuster Under Siege, and the fighters were the stoic Tommy Lee Jones and the ponytailed personification of invincibility, Steven Seagal. The movie pits Jones, as a maniacal ex-CIA villain, against Seagal, as a ship's cook who is secretly a lethal ex-Navy SEAL. On paper, it was the perfect action matchup. In reality, it was a battle of wills. At the time, Steven Seagal was at the peak of his fame. He wasn't just an actor. He was a brand who controlled his own projects and, most importantly, his on-screen image. And that image was built on one simple rule: he could never, ever look weak. This was the source of all the conflict. According to reports from the set, Jones, a classically trained actor fresh off an Oscar-nominated performance in JFK, was appalled by what he saw as Seagal's limited acting and his on-set demands. The breaking point was Seagal's contract, which reportedly stipulated that his character could never lose a fight, not just in the end, but in any given skirmish. Stunt coordinators have since shared stories about how absurd this got. During rehearsals, Seagal would allegedly count the punches thrown to make sure he always landed more hits than he took. To a serious actor like Tommy Lee Jones, this wasn't filmmaking. It was a pathetic vanity project. The tension grew so bad that for many of their shared scenes, the director had to film Jones and Seagal separately and splice them together in editing. They were the two leads of a massive blockbuster who could barely stand to be in the same room. In the years since, Jones has mostly stayed silent on the topic, but his disdain was clear. This feud is a perfect example of Jones's core belief. The movie is more important than the star. For Steven Seagal, the star was the movie. And here we are, the #1 spot, the most legendary, most quoted, and most personal feud of Tommy Lee Jones's entire career. This is the story of his bitter clash with comedy superstar Jim Carrey on the set of Batman Forever. While Jones had issues with others on that film, his contempt for Carrey was on another level. It was a visceral public rejection of everything Carrey stood for as a performer. The year was 1995, and Jim Carrey was the biggest movie star on the planet. He was coming off Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber. He was a force of nature, an improvisational genius cast as the Riddler. Into this comedic tornado stepped Tommy Lee Jones, the grizzled Oscar winner playing Two-Face. It was a combustible mix from day one. Jones, the stoic Texan who valued discipline and the written word, was now sharing a screen with a human cartoon, who treated the script as a friendly suggestion. According to director Joel Schumacher, Jones's dislike for Carrie was immediate. Schumacher believed it came from professional jealousy. "Tommy is a scene stealer," he explained. "Well, you can't steal the scene from Jim Carrey. It's impossible, and I think it irked Tommy." Jones, used to being the most powerful presence on set, was now working with a comedic supernova who commanded everyone's attention. He reportedly couldn't stand Carrey's on-set antics and what he saw as a total lack of discipline. The simmering hatred finally boiled over in a now famous encounter at a restaurant during production. Jim Carrey has told the story many times. Seeing Jones dining at the same place, Carrey went over to say hello. As he approached, he said the blood just seemed to drain from Jones's face. Carrey greeted him, and Jones got up, shaking. He went to hug Carrey and whispered, "I hate you. I really don't like you." A stunned Carrey asked what the problem was. It was then that Tommy Lee Jones delivered the immortal line. He looked Carrey dead in the eye and said, "I cannot sanction your buffoonery." Then he walked out. That single word, buffoonery, says it all. It was a dismissal, not just of Carrey's comedy, but of his entire artistic identity. To Jones, Carrey wasn't an actor. He was a clown. The incident reportedly happened right before they were supposed to shoot their biggest scenes together. When asked about it later, Jones gave a classic non-denial, saying only that he was in a bad mood that day. Unsurprisingly, the two have never worked together again. In the serious, professional world of Tommy Lee Jones, there is simply no room for buffoonery. So, what's the takeaway from all this? From the quiet clash of methods with Sally Field to the outright declaration of hatred toward Jim Carrey, a clear picture emerges of a man with an unshakable devotion to his vision of acting. Whether you see him as a principled artist defending his craft or just a difficult, grumpy bully, one thing is certain: he leaves an impression. The common thread here is his demand for seriousness. He clashed with Field's emotional process, Snipes' physical showmanship, Kilmer's method immersion, Siegel's ego, and Carrey's chaotic comedy because, in his mind, all of it got in the way of the job, telling the story truthfully and efficiently. In an age of media-trained stars who are terrified of saying the wrong thing, there's something oddly refreshing about Tommy Lee Jones. He is who he is, and he's not interested in being liked. And despite his reputation, directors keep hiring him, because the same intensity that makes him a nightmare for some co-stars is exactly what makes him so magnetic on screen. But what do you think? After hearing these stories, was Tommy Lee Jones a principled artist, or was he just a jerk? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.